Good evening and welcome to FLAIR, the First Ladies Association for Research and Education, and our first virtual program for 2026. I'm Diana Carlin. I'm the new president of FLAIR, and I'm very happy this evening to have, I think, a really interesting program about a woman that is very mysterious in some ways, a lot of misunderstandings about her, but someone who we definitely need to learn about. So tonight's program is From Wytheville to the White House about Edith Wilson. And you're going to find out a little bit about the Edith Wilson birthplace. But before we get to that, and I introduce our moderator for the evening, I want to acknowledge all those supporters of FLAIR, especially our institutional members. And the Edith Wilson birthplace is one of those members. And all of our institutional members, along with all of our individual members, through their membership, through their donations, make it possible for you to see this free of charge. And we have all of our videos that we've been doing for 4.5 years now on our YouTube site. And if you go to our website, flair-net.org, you can find every single program that we've done. We also have a podcast called American FLOTUS. And if you go to our website once again and go under research and education, you will find the link to all of our podcasts along with transcripts. So those of you who are researchers have a documentation that you can cite. And so we're very excited about the programming that we're doing and that we're making available to the public. So please check out our website at flair-net. The mission of the First Ladies Association for Research and Education is to create and sustain a network to promote and publicize research and education relevant to the contributions, lives, and impacts and lasting legacies of U.S. First Ladies. And so tonight, we're going to talk about one of those First Ladies and her background. And you'll begin to understand a lot more about what she did in the White House when you understand from whence she came. So our moderator for tonight's program is Rebecca Boggs Roberts, who is the Deputy Chief of Library Events at the Library of Congress. But more importantly, Rebecca is the author of a biography of Edith Wilson called Untold Power, The Fascinating Rise and Complex Legacy of First Lady Edith Wilson. So please join me in welcoming tonight's moderator, Rebecca Roberts.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you everyone for participating in this event. You know, when I first set out to write a biography of Edith Bolling Galt Wilson, one of the challenges is that she married a sitting president. She married Woodrow Wilson during the end of his first term. And so she didn't rise up through the ranks the way most first ladies do. She didn't really have an on-ramp to the position, which meant that she didn't have much of a public presence until 1915 when she married the president. And so to understand her and to understand her actions, you need a broader sense of who she was. And in order to get that broader sense, her birthplace in Wytheville, Virginia was invaluable. And so I am delighted to let you all have a little virtual peek at the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum in Wytheville, Virginia. Wytheville is in the southwest corner of Virginia. You'll see in some of the videos that play, the Appalachian Mountains are right there. She is still our only Appalachian First Lady. You'll learn a little bit about her story and about efforts to restore and conserve the place where she was born. And taking us on that journey are Farron Smith, the founder of the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum, and Adam Manuel, the program and education director there. Farron?
Oh, it's wonderful to see you all here tonight, and we appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about Mrs. Wilson with you. I would like to start to share information about visiting the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum and a little background on Mrs. Wilson herself, a woman from Wytheville, Virginia, whose life reached all the way to the White House. This museum tells a very personal story. It's not just about a first lady, but how a little girl's upbringing in rural Virginia helped prepare her for the challenges she would face as First Lady during a very pivotal time in our nation's history. At the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum, you will experience the only birthplace museum of a First Lady in Virginia and one of only 8 museums in the country dedicated to the interpretation of a First Lady. The Bolling building that houses the museum and the Bolling home is the oldest brick commercial building in Wytheville. In the street-level museum, visitors will see period furnishings, photographs, letters, and exhibits that bring Edith Bolling Wilson's story to life. The artifacts in the museum belong personally to Mrs. Wilson, to her Bolling family, or to the family of Woodrow Wilson. And above the museum on the 2nd floor is the Bolling home where Edith was born and raised. You'll learn more about the Bolling home in just a few minutes. A visit to the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum helps to understand who Edith was before she became First Lady. I think understanding Edith's early life helps us understand the woman she became. She was a direct descendant of Pocahontas and is related to Thomas Jefferson, Martha Washington, and Robert E. Lee. Edith was born here in 1872, the 7th of 11 children, and raised in Wytheville during a time when expectations for women were very different than they are today. Her family valued education, responsibility, and independence, traits that clearly shaped her later life. Edith was mostly educated by her grandmother Bolling and her parents, and had only 2 years of formal education. But that was not to say she was uneducated. She became a world traveler, she owned a business, and was the first woman in Washington, D.C. to own and drive an electric car. And that was all before she met President Wilson. As visitors tour the Bolling home, they learn about the daily life in the 19th century Southwest Virginia and how Edith developed the confidence and self-reliance that would later define her public role as First Lady. Edith's life changed dramatically when she married President Woodrow Wilson in 1915 and became First Lady of the United States. And what a love story. Her years in the White House coincided with World War I, one of the most difficult periods in our nation's history. Edith quickly became a trusted advisor, helpmate, confidant, and partner to the president. She was intelligent, observant, and deeply involved in the workings of the administration, far more than most first ladies of her time. In 1919, President Wilson suffered a stroke that left him unable to fully carry out his duties. At that moment, Edith Bolling Wilson stepped into an unprecedented role. There was no legislation in place dictating what would happen if a president became incapacitated. And the vice president said no when approached about assuming the role of president. On the advice of President Wilson's doctors, Edith managed access to the president, reviewed documents, and decided what matters required his attention. She is often criticized for her role in governmental affairs during that time and is seen as overstepping her boundaries as First Lady. Edith later referred to this period as her stewardship, a word that reflects how seriously she took her responsibility to the country. This chapter of her life continues to spark discussions among historians and visitors alike about leadership, duty, and the evolving role of women in government. Edith Bolling Wilson is often described as one of the most influential First Ladies in American history. Her story challenges us to think about leadership behind the scenes, women's roles in times of crisis, how someone from a small town can shape national history, and caregiving roles. As a little girl, Edith was caregiver to her grandmother Bolling, who was an invalid. She was caregiver to President Wilson when he suffered a stroke. And later in life, she was caregiver to 3 of her siblings until their deaths. The museum preserves not only Edith Bolling Wilson's story, but Wytheville's connection to the White House and to the broader American story. Well, the following video will give you a glimpse into what to expect when you visit the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum.
Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum, one of only 8 museums in the country dedicated to the interpretation of a First Lady, and the only one in Virginia. Edith was more than just the second wife of President Woodrow Wilson. Visitors to the museum learn the amazing story of the little girl who, from her humble beginnings in Wytheville, grew up to become one of the most influential and significant women in the 20th century. They get a glimpse of Edith's young life as they step into the bedroom where Edith was born and stand on the porch with the bird cages of Grandmother Bolling's 26 canaries. Through the museum's living history programs, from Wytheville to the White House, Edith's journey is brought to life. Young Edith tells how her childhood in Wytheville prepared her for the challenges that she would face as First Lady. First Lady Mrs. Wilson, who is sometimes referred to as the first woman president, is often seen visiting the museum. Did you know that Edith Bolling Wilson was the first woman in Washington, D.C. to own and operate an electric car? Visit the museum to see her original operator's license and learn about the Wilsons keeping the sheep on the White House lawn and Edith's role in helping to win the Great War. The museum is located directly across from the Bolling Wilson Hotel on Main Street in Wytheville. There's no admission charge for visiting the museum, but donations are appreciated. Hours vary by season. Visit the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum's website for more information, and we hope to see you soon.
Before I discuss Phase 1 restoration and renovation of the Bolling home, I feel it is only important to discuss a little bit of the history of the Bolling house. The Bolling family moved here into this 2-story building in 1866 after the Civil War. By this point, the structure was approximately 20 years old, briefly serving as a makeshift hospital during the Civil War. From 1866 to 1899, Judge William Bolling and Sally Bolling lived here and raised their 10 children. That's a lot of kids. Upon the death of Judge Bolling in 1899, the home was sold, electricity and plumbing were installed, and the home was converted to a boarding house throughout the early 20th century. In 1950, records indicate Wytheville was hit hardest per capita in the entire nation by polio. The town of Wytheville quarantined itself from the outside world, and a doctor from Scotland was brought in to treat patients suffering from polio. That doctor lived upstairs and saw patients in what was once the Bolling Home. The building was also used by the famous Durham's restaurant in the 1950s through the 1970s. Subsequently, the space was also used in the 1970s as a dance studio. The building was purchased in 1989 by Bill and Farron Smith and was ultimately founded the Edith Bolling Wilson Foundation in 2005 and opened the museum in 2008. Though the pressing repairs were immediately made, things like the roof and the windows, including the goal was always to restore the building to its former glory. However, the foundation faced key issues. For example, there's all kinds of elements of various uses of the house. You'll see elements of the dance studio and the restaurant, things like that. Also, there are elements, the cost was also an element that was always causing some issue, and it made restoration seem far off. However, in the last 2 years, the museum has been moving forward, making great strides in realizing its goals in restoration that were made in 2008. In 2025, the museum began working with Dr. Lisa Tucker, director for the Center for Historic Preservation at Virginia Tech. She and her students have been working collaboratively with the museum to provide valuable insight into elements such as for the restoration, including wallpaper and furniture and things like that. The museum has worked with architect Carter Green to create a preservation plan to assist the museum in aspects of restoration. The good news is to fund phase 1 of the Bolling Home Project, funding was received from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Wythe Bland Foundation, the town of Wytheville, Wythe County, and friends of the museum. We're always very proud of our contributions from our friends. After nearly 2 decades, funds were acquired that allowed major restoration to begin. The first phase is both restoration and renovation. The main stairwell will be restored, bringing back many original elements. The middle section is being renovated to include an HVAC system that will allow the use of the Bolling Home year-round. The space will be converted into an educational center for programs and events for larger audiences than previously possible. For technology, the room will include high-definition screens and sound systems. This will also contribute to the accessibility of the building, because this technology will not only provide modernized resources for programming, but will provide closed captioning and high-quality accessibility for visitors with certain limitations. Future phases are planned and will provide restoration of all rooms and HVAC systems throughout the entire Bolling Home. An elevator, because the Bolling Home is on the 2nd floor. ADA-compliant restrooms, updated electrical systems. Dr. Lisa Tucker is actively involved in the process of performing wallpaper and textile studies, which are essential. While the upstairs Bolling Home is currently closed during construction, we did not want visitors to miss the important story and be able to still see what the upstairs looks like. A virtual tour now allows guests to walk through the Bolling Home and see how it how many uses for still evident today. Enjoy the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum's virtual tour of the Bolling home.
After the Civil War, the Bolling family lost their plantation home in Bedford County. In 1866, Edith Bolling Wilson's father moved his young family into General William Terry.
My father hoped to establish himself in the practice of law. My parents arrived only to find this haven untenable, as it had been used, and they moved in. 8 of my siblings and I were born here.
It was in this bedroom that Edith Bolling was born on a morning at 9 o'clock, October 15, 1882. Judge Bolling's study, sometimes called the library, has changed very little over the years. The Bolling children spent memorable times with their father in this room.
His death left a void in my life that still throbs with pain.
There were 2 grandmothers, parents, many children, aunts, and cousins residing in the Bolling home. The original open porch was a gathering place for the family on warm summer nights, and looked very much like it does today. Edith, at age 13, was photographed on the chimney, with Grandmother Bolling's bird cages to her. Did a cello china.
Read from Dickens or Shakespeare. Grandpa voice.
Her last she climbed the steps to her birthplace and childhood home, though her early years, and prepared her for life.
We invite you to visit the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum and tour the Bolling home to explore the life of a remarkable woman whose roots were right here in Wytheville and whose impact reached far beyond it. While you are in Wytheville, plan to stay at the historic Bolling Wilson Hotel, located directly across the street from the Edith Bolling Wilson Birthplace Museum. Now, in 1960, on Mrs. Wilson's last visit to Wytheville, she stayed at this hotel that today is named in her honor. And to know more about Edith Bolling Wilson and the role she played in the presidency, I highly recommend Rebecca Roberts' book, Untold Power, The Fascinating Rise and Complex Legacy of First Lady Edith Wilson. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello. So I'm delighted to hear that construction has begun on restoring the home. You mentioned a couple of times that, as did I, that her childhood in Wytheville formed the character that she needed to face the nation when she became First Lady. Expand a little bit more on that, Farron. How do you think her childhood in Wytheville shaped her character?
Well, of course, she lived with a large family. There were up to 20 family members at any time living in the home in this commercial building, along with grandmother Bolling's 26 canaries. But it was her grandmothers, I think, who had the biggest influence in her life. Grandmother Bolling was the matriarch of the family. She had a big influence on Edith's life. Grandmother, the other grandmother on her mother's side was the Southern lady. She taught Edith, you do not sit with your backs touching the chair. So both grandmothers definitely influenced her upbringing.
You know, I think it's very interesting when you see Edith Wilson tell her own story in her memoir and try to explain her role when President Wilson suffered his stroke. I very much see the influence of both of those grandmothers, that her Bolling grandmother had taught her to be confident and to believe she could do anything she wanted. And her mother's mother had taught her to kind of pretend she didn't, right? To be
Yes.
a lady above all and to
Mhm.
sweep her own power under the rug a little bit.
Well, that's so true. And then, of course, her father was educated. He was came here as a young lawyer, became judge of Pulaski and Wythe counties, and he really played an important role in the children's upbringing too, especially in their religious upbringing.
And it's really too bad that Edith was not able to have more formal schooling because she was so bright. You know, and as she tells in her memoir, her first year at school in Abingdon was not delightful, but she loved her second year of school. And then by the time it was time to go back, you know, the next three kids were boys, and the family only had money to educate them. It's particularly remarkable to see how confidently she navigated Gilded Age Washington and then the White House without that, not just formal education in terms of classroom education, but with the sort of broadening horizon that a sophisticated life might have given her.
Well, that's true. And you think about her grandmother Bolling, the children had a club, and Edith was treasurer because she had the ear of her grandmother Bolling, who held the purse strings. So she learned to be negotiate and how to work with people to, I guess, to get what she wanted.
The house, I think, you know, we got a sense of it from the video, but the notion that 20 people were ever there is astounding. I mean, I think when you see the exterior, it looks pretty big, but the street level is storefronts. That third level is a false gable.
Right.
So the family was just in that second level, and you know, it's really oddly shaped, like not all the rooms connect to each other. Describe how it feels to be in there.
Well, originally the property was two houses, and this was in the mid 1840s. Around the 1850s, the two houses were joined together with a stairway, which made the upstairs into one residence. But when you visit the home, you can see the division between the two houses. But I'm sure there were beds, trundle beds, cribs, probably in most every room. So I'm sure they were a very tight-knit family.
Whether they wanted to be or not, right?
But what warm stories of the children coming together in the parlor, grandmother Bolling knitting, father reading Shakespeare to the children. So it was a very loving family.
And Adam, when visitors come, what are some of the most common questions you get? What do they want to know?
One of the most common questions is whether Edith had any children. And of course, she did have a child, was with her first husband, Norman. Unfortunately, the child lived 2 to 3 days. And other than knowing that it was a little boy, we really don't know too much about that. Also, people are quite interested in the electric car because it's quite an interesting thing. People don't know that electric cars existed back in her time. And we like to tell them that things really haven't changed that much since then.
I have to tell you, I fell down a deep research rabbit hole on the history of electric cars when I was writing my biography, because I had the same question. It feels like such a modern innovation. And not only were there electric cars, but because they were so much cleaner and easier to run than gas cars of the day, which you had to crank and were stinky and all of that, they were specifically marketed to women as this little runabout town, and had a bud vase on the dashboard just so that it could feel particularly feminine. And I found a couple of memoirs from other people who lived in Washington in the early teens who all talk about Mrs. Galt and her little electric runabout around town. She was known. She was quite a figure. I also imagine, and I see it in your background, people want to know about the sheep.
Yes.
Why did Mrs. Wilson put sheep on the White House lawn? And why did you write a book about it, Farron? Yeah.
I'll let you take that.
Well, we had a preschool class who wanted a program, and we thought, what can we tell these children about that would be of interest? And so we came up with the story of how the sheep helped win the war. Joyce Covey happens to be my sister. She is a retired school teacher, reading specialist. And we told the story of President and Mrs. Wilson putting a flock of sheep on the White House lawn during World War I to free the gardeners for wartime duties. The sheep do what little sheep do. They multiplied. They ended up shearing the sheep, naming it White House wool. It was auctioned off for the Red Cross and raised, according to Edith, nearly $100,000 for the Red Cross for the war effort. But teachers especially love this book. It has authentic photographs in it. It has a glossary, and it's a true story. So we've sold our first 2,000 copies. We've made some edits and updates. And now we're into our next 1,000 copies. So it's been a wonderful educational tool for us and opened doors because it is a fun, interesting story.
I mean, I got to tell you, it is, to me, such an example of Edith's savvy.
Yes.
Again, she showed who she was over and over again. And not only were the sheep this very visible symbol of collective sacrifice for World War I, but also to auction off the wool for the Red Cross. It's still apparently the most expensive wool ever sold by weight. You can see a sample of it if you go to the Wilson House here in Washington, D.C. on S Street. But how clever and how surprising for someone who had not been in politics until she married the president. We have a question from the audience who says, did I understand you to say that Wilson's VP refused to assume duties after he had his stroke? Wilson's VP was Thomas Marshall.
And apparently they did go to Vice President Marshall and asked him, and he, from what I understand, threw up his hands and said no and left town. So there was no legislation in place. This wouldn't be done until years later. So, people wonder, why didn't the vice president step up? But he was not interested in the position for reasons we may not know. But Edith then took the advice of her physician, of Dr. Wilson's physicians, tried to protect him from Congress and the public. And I think she probably really believed he would recover. But of course, today it's a topic of quite controversy and overstepping on her part. but she did, with her care and the doctor's care, he was able to fulfill his duties as president.
Yeah, and just to add a little context there, so as Farron mentioned, the 25th Amendment didn't exist. The process by which someone stepped in when the president was incapacitated was only included in some pretty vague language in the Constitution, and most crucially, the mechanism by which a president could be named incompetent was very unclear. And so Thomas Marshall, who was a little bit of a clown, frankly, was kind of the court jester of that administration. Not only did he very much not want to be president, but he really didn't want to be seen as usurping the presidency illegitimately. And the law wasn't clear. It's one of the reasons the 25th Amendment was passed. I mean, Wilson's situation was included in the debate when, it was mainly focused on the Kennedy assassination, but in the 1970s when the 25th Amendment was ratified, his story was certainly part of it. So it wasn't that Thomas Marshall, was just shirking his duty. He just was in an impossible situation where he didn't want to be seen to be grabbing power in an illegitimate way. We have another question that says, can you elaborate on Edith's caretaking of her siblings? It seems like she was a force in the White House and among her family. Oh, I can't hear you, Farron. So I don't know if it's my audio issue or yours, but I can't hear you very well. There you are.
Is that?
You're back.
Okay.
One question I get asked a lot, I'd be curious to hear your take, is because the suffrage movement was very active during President Wilson's presidency, was Edith Wilson a supporter of suffrage, and why or why not?
Well, I think we know the answer to that. She was not.
Yeah.
She was not. And if we could change any one thing about Mrs. Wilson, it would be her views on women's right to vote. And it's hard to understand. She was living the dream of every suffragette. Here she was living in the White House, had input in governmental affairs, and yet, for whatever reason, she did not believe in the suffrage movement. But it wasn't uncommon for women during that time not to be in favor of women's vote. She was in the majority, but thank goodness there were those women with the foresight and the vision to continue the fight, that today we all have the right to vote. And we've come a long way, baby. But it's hard to understand. And I think in your book, Rebecca, you explain it better, looking at her childhood and her upbringing. So you might want to talk more about that too.
Yeah, she never said why. So I think we're all just guessing based on how well we think we know her. But I do think that that message she was getting in her childhood, especially from her mother's mother, about being proud of being domestic and feminine and submissive, and not stepping out of line into the public sphere of men, which was getting your hands dirty in some way, and also maybe undermining how important the domestic sphere was if you admitted you were ambitious for something more. And so I think there was certainly some of that with her. I do also definitely believe that once she was the first lady and the National Women's Party was campaigning very directly against President Wilson and picketing the White House, the National Women's Party being the sort of more militant arm of the suffrage movement, she really hated that. She took it very personally. She found them very distasteful. They were just tacky to her in some ways, but also directly criticizing her husband was always going to be a no-go with Edith. She was fierce about that. So even if she was maybe in a mood to change her mind as her world progressed, I think the tactics of the National Women's Party certainly set her back there. I understand that, unfortunately, your answer about caregiving your siblings, it was not just me that didn't hear it. It was everybody. So I'm going to ask that question again. Tell us about Edith's role as a caregiver in her family.
Well, caregiving came early in Edith's life. As a little girl, she first started caregiving for Grandmother Bolling's 26 canaries. But when we move up from Grandmother Bolling, who was an invalid, to the president's stroke, and then later in life to 3 of her siblings, President Wilson lived only 3 years after the presidency. Edith lived another 37 years in the S Street house, which today is the Woodrow Wilson House Museum. And during that 37 years, it's the first brother that lived with her was Randolph, who served as her secretary, very important person in her life. Her brother Wilmer, and then later in life, Gertrude, her older sister by 9 years. And they all lived in the home with her. And she took care of them, and especially Gertrude, who was very ill at the end of her life. Edith was really concerned and worried that she would pass away before her siblings, and especially Gertrude, and there would be no one there to care for them. So Edith did outlive Gertrude, and I think Gertrude lived way up into her 90s. Edith was 89 when she passed away. So she was a caregiver. It was just her nature. Any of her great nieces and nephews today would tell you what a caregiver she was to all the family.
Yeah, I think, she was kind of a load-bearing wall in that family, right? She wasn't just caring for them as they got elderly. She got all her brother's jobs at Galt Jewelers.
Right.
She supported her mother and her sister, unmarried sister. She just really was the lodestone, especially after her father died. She took on that role, considering she was kind of in the shuffle of all those siblings, and not necessarily, the oldest son or someone you might expect to step in and take responsibility. She took it all on.
Yeah.
We have a question. What is the schedule for completing the renovations? I know you have 3 phases, and it's just phase 1 right now, but tell us more.
Well, phase 1 started back in December. We expect at least a portion of phase 1 to be finished by spring. Then after the initial restoration and renovation part is done, we're going to do a little bit more, and that should be finished by the fall of 2026. Then moving forward, we'll enter, we're currently planning phase 2, and phase 3 is not far off. So probably within the next 2 to 5 years, everything should be completed.
And it all comes down to funding. It's hard to continue to fundraise for operations, but on top of that, to receive funding for this historic site. So that's a whole new effort that we'll be working on very soon.
And I hope you all caught that the plumbing and electricity was added after the Bolling family owned this road.
Yeah.
Yes.
So 20 people in that place with neither of those amenities.
And we have a wonderful living history program Betsy Ely portrays the First Lady, and she oversees several little girls who portray little Edith and young Edith. So when school groups come into the museum for educational programs, it's little Edith talking about chamber pots hidden beneath the beds.
I bet that gets their attention.
Yeah.
There's a question that says, you mentioned Edith didn't think she'd have to be the steward for too long, that Wilson would recover. Is there any evidence about how long she thought that might be? Like 2 months, 6 months, a year?
Well, we base that on doctors' views of a stroke. During that time, they would put them in a dark room, keep them very quiet. So there wasn't a lot known really about the length or condition of in the treatment for a stroke. And I think when Wilson's first wife, Ellen, was so ill, he was sort of kept in the dark about her illness. So we don't know exactly what all Edith knew about his illness, but we do believe just from reading and surmise just from our knowledge about how she would think, that she did have hopes that it would be short term.
And then some things we've seen in one, I can't remember the book, but Woodrow had more than one stroke in his life. There were some that were smaller and less serious, and he recovered within a few weeks. So the doctors would have probably been telling Edith, it might be a few weeks, it might be a month or two, but it wouldn't be that long. But obviously it turned out to be quite a extended recovery for him.
Mm-hmm. And he did improve. He just never improved all the way.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, from that acute moment right after the stroke, when he was really at death's door, he did slowly get some motion back, get some acuity back, but he really never fully recovered.
Mm-hmm.
There is I hope people are seeing this at the bottom of the page, because the 7-minute video showing the Birthplace Museum had some technical issues. It will be on the website tomorrow so that people can see it at their leisure, which is excellent. We are almost out of time here, but I want to ask a little bit about Wytheville and sort of how you feel that the Edith Bolling Wilson birthplace fits into town, and how the town sees you, and how that relationship is going.
Well, I think Wytheville's very fortunate to be the birthplace of a First Lady. There's no other little town in the country who has the birthplace of a First Lady right in the heart of their downtown. If you look back at especially downtown Wytheville 10, 15 years ago, it doesn't look like it does today. And it all started, I think, with this museum, which led to the renovation of what is now the Bolling Wilson Hotel, and all of that together in a very strong downtown Wytheville Incorporated, which is a Main Street community, with the leadership of Todd Wolford and their board. They have embraced what the hotel and the museum has done for tourism, and made so many improvements to our downtown. Today we have more retail shops open. We have the Grind, a coffee shop right beside the museum, Skeeter's world famous hot dogs celebrating 100 years, Sturgill's jewelry store. We have new restaurants popping up. So it's really made a difference in revitalization of our town, and not only our town, but our county and all of Southwest Virginia. We're bringing in people who normally would not come. They would stop at Interstate, but because of the hotel and Grays on Main, the restaurant, people are getting off of downtown. And when they come to the birthplace of a First Lady, then they might spend a day or two and they'll go to other attractions in the area, the shot tower. There's so much more to see in Wytheville. And but it's not every little town that has the birthplace of a first lady right on Main Street. So it's really made a difference with tourism in the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Wytheville Incorporated. Our wonderful partners Visit Wytheville. Shane Terry serves on our Board of Trustees. So we're so very fortunate to have the support, the friendship, and the partnerships of our friends in Wytheville, Wythe County, and all of Southwest Virginia.
Well, I highly recommend a visit. If anyone's in the DC area, it's a beautiful drive through the Shenandoah Valley down to Wytheville. You can do it in the morning, and it's absolutely worth seeing the town, seeing the birthplace. We'll wait to see the renovations in the upstairs, but the ground level storefront museum is open. And you have done, Farron, you and Bill have really done an amazing job bringing Edith's story to life and preserving that property. So thank you from all of us.
Well, from Ed and I, we both thank you for having this opportunity. And it is a little jewel right here on Main Street. So we invite you all to come visit.
Well, on behalf of Flair, I want to thank you, Farron, Adam, and Rebecca for a really interesting program. And I need to get to Wytheville.
Yes.
That's going to be on my bucket list of First Ladies. I really want to compliment you and your husband, Farron, for having the vision to bring this back to life. I know that's not easy to do, and we've had so much, history just destroyed over the years, and so few of these places, like you said, given how many Virginia First Ladies we've had, this is the only birthplace. And, it'd be great to still have Martha Washington's there, but, it isn't. So it took real visionaries, and I know it's never easy to raise money. But I wish you well in your fundraising. And we did put up your website. So if anybody is inclined to support your work, the website was in the comments. And the Flair website just flashed up. So it's flair-net.org. So this will be posted. So if you know somebody who might be interested, it will be on our YouTube channel immediately. And tomorrow morning, we will post the link to the entire 7 minutes of that video that we had a few technical problems with. So thanks to all of you. And I want to thank everyone who joined us, and keep remembering all the First Ladies. So thank you very much, and good night from Flair.
Thank you.
Thank you.